dependency injection is based on is the inversion of control. Now, if you ask me what is inversion of control, then I can say that, as the name suggests, inversion of control is basically used to invert different kinds of additional responsibilities of a class rather than the main responsibility itself. So if I have to explain you in simpler terms, then consider an example wherein you have the ability to cook. According to the IOC principle or the inversion of control principle, you can invert the control. So instead of you cooking the food, you can just directly order from outside, wherein you receive the food at your doorstep. So basically what's happening over here is that, you had to cook the food, but yes, according to inversion of control, what you did was, you just ordered the food and then you got your food at your doorstep. The process of food delivered to you at your doorstep is basically the inversion of control, right? So in this way, you do not have to take care of the additional responsibilities and just focus on the main work. So this is basically the concept behind the dependency injection, guys, basically where, a class should not configure its dependency statically, but it should be configured by some other class from outside. So a class should concentrate on fulfilling its responsibilities like the flow of application and should not concentrate on creating objects. So guys, this was basically the idea behind dependency injection. Now let's take a look at the types of dependency injection. Now there are mainly three types of dependency injection, that is the constructor injection, the setter injection or the property injection, and the interface injection. Talking about the constructor injection first, in this type of injection, the injector supplies the dependency through the client class constructor. Coming to the setter injection or the property injection, in this type of injection, the injector method injects the dependency to the setter method exposed by the client. And finally, coming to the interface injection, in this type of injection, the injector uses the interface to provide dependency to the client class, and the clients must implement an interface that will expose a setter method which will accept the dependency. So guys, these were the different types of dependency injection. So I hope till now you've understood that, dependency injection is basically responsible to create objects, understand which classes require those objects, and finally provide those classes with the objects. So on that note, let's take a look at the next topic, that is the benefits of dependency injection. Now, before I list down the benefits of dependency injection, let me explain you the need for this injection on an industry level to help you understand the benefits better. Consider a scenario where you have an email class whose sole responsibility is to take care of the emails received. Now, this class will have objects such as the to email address, the from email address, the subject, and the body of the email. Now, if the company wants to save text and audio messages, do you think this class can save the message? Well, I would say the answer is no. This is because, the email class cannot handle the parameters of the text and the audio messages. So in such cases, you will have to recreate the class, and now recreating the class is quite a cumbersome job, especially if you have to do it regularly, right? And that too on an industry basis. Instead, you can just directly use the dependency injection concept where you have to change the objects at the runtime. In this way, you do not have to recreate the class, which will further help you in a lot of ways on a production level. So if I have to summarize the benefits of dependency injection for you, then I would say it enables an easy way to interact with the components. The applications can be easily extended. It makes unit testing much easier and reduces the boilerplate code. So guys, that was all about dependency injection. I hope you've understood, what was dependency injection, why is it used, where is it used, how do you benefit with dependency injection, and so on. So well, that was about the theory part of dependency injection. Now let's move on to the hands-on part of the dependency injection. So let's get started with the hands-on part. So for that, I'll go back to my Eclipse IDE. And now let's say we create a new project. So for that, I'll go to File, I'll go to New, and then I'll choose Spring Starter Project. Right? And let's say we mention the name to be Dependency Demo. And then our group is com.example and the package is com.example.demo again. And then what I'll do is I'll click on next. Now, once I click on next, what I'll do is I'll basically add the dependency files for it. So let's say I just add the web dependency, right? So I'll just search for web. I'll add in web services, let's say Jersey also. And then you can go forward and add the other dependency files also. But for now, I'll just click on finish over here. So now once I click on finish, you can see on your left hand side that our project is getting created. So until then, I'll just close all these files so that there's no confusion, right? So let's just wait for it to create. Now once the project is created, when I click on this file, you automatically see that we get our application file, which is something like this, that it's a Spring Boot application, and then you have to execute this particular class on executing this particular project. Next, what you have to do is you have to create a class in the same package, and to do that, what you'll do is you have to right click over here, go to new, and then you'll choose class, right? And after that, you'll mention the class name. So let's say, I mentioned the class name to be, let's say, customers, right? So we'll be looking into example where I'll consider customers, and then I'll click on finish. Now, once I click on finish, this is what that you see on your screen. Now, let's say, we add few parameters for our customers. Let's say customer IDs, customer name, and let's say the course name that he has taken from Edureka, right? So for that, what I'll do is I'll just mention private int, and let's say I mention cust ID. That is basically for customer ID. Similarly, I'll mention private string, and let's say I mention customer name, and private, let's say string again, we mention course name. Now, after this is done, what you have to do is we'll basically add the getter setter methods for these particular properties. So for that, I'll just select these particular properties, right click over here, go to source, and then I'll choose generate getter and setter methods, right? So I'll just basically select all and click on generate. Right now, once I click on generate, you see that automatically our getter setter methods have got generated for these particular parameters, right? So I'll just copy the customer name and the course name from over here, and then I'll paste it over here so that there's no confusion. Now let's say you have a scenario where you have to create an object for customers and you do not want to do it manually. Now in such a scenario, you will have to use the dependency injection to get the objects whenever you require it. So that's what we were talking in theory part, where you do not want to create objects manually, but you want to get it at the runtime, or maybe you want to recreate them, right? So this is where basically dependency injection comes into the picture, where you want to get the objects whenever there's a requirement. So now let's see how we can achieve that with the help of dependency injection. So what I'll do is I'll first go back to my application file, and then what I'll do is I'll basically change the run line in the application class file, right? So over here, if you see, we have spring application.run, and then we have the application class name and the arguments, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically change it to configurable context, right? So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it is equal to, and then on the left hand side, I'll mention configurable application context. Let's say we mention context. And then if it shows an error, you basically have to import the required library. So let's just wait for that to come. Right, so I'll just basically import this particular library, that is import context.configurable application context. Now what this line of code will basically do is that it will return an object at the time of execution. So that's what we wanted, right? We wanted to create an object, or maybe we wanted to return an object at the runtime execution. So that's what this particular line is going to do. Now what you have to do is you have to basically add the line customers C is equal to context dot get bean, right? So that is what, and then we'll mention the class name, that is customers dot class, right? And then you clearly see that we're getting errors. Let's see what's the error for. All right, so I missed a semicolon over here, right? And then my C should be capital because my customer's class name is capital, and also my C should be capital over here, right? So that's what resolves our error. So basically over here, with the help of this particular line, we're trying to tell the compiler to return an object of the customer's class, right? So after that, what you have to do is you have to check whether it is working or not. So to do that, we can go back to our customer's class, and then what we can do is we can just add the public void display method, right? So what I'll do is I'll just add a method, let's say public, and let's put it in lowercase, and I'll mention public void display, just a single bracket, and then in brackets I'll mention system.out.println, and in brackets I'll mention the text, let's say object returned successfully, right? And then I'll just end it with a semicolon, and let's say I make it more clear, that is customers object returned successfully, right? Now basically this particular method, that is a display method, will return an output that customers object returned successfully if our code runs fine. Next, what you have to do is you have to go back to the application file again, and then you have to basically mention the method's name over here, that is c.display that we had just created, right? So over here, you're basically calling the object of the customer's class with the reference of the display method. So that's how basically you can use. Now let's execute the project and see what happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this particular project. So I'll just right click over here, go to run as and choose Spring Boot app, right? So I'll just click on OK and let me just drag this particular output console. All right, there's an error to start, and that is because Tomcat connector has failed to start on port 8080. The port is already in use, right? So for that, let's say we again change the port number. So I'll go back to my resources file and I'll mention server.port equal to, let's say, 8082, right? And then I'll again execute this particular code. So I'll right click over here, go to run as and choose Spring Boot app. Now, when you execute this particular project, we see an error of no qualifying bean of type com.example.demo.customers is available. Now, this is basically because, the customer class which you have defined is not a Spring bean. That is, it is not a Spring object. So to tell the Spring container that, we need an object of the customer class, we need to mention the @component annotation in the customer's class, right? So we'll go back to our customer's class. And then what I'll do is I'll scroll up. And over here, I'll mention @component and I'll import the required libraries for that. Now, once you mention the @component annotation, what happens is that when you mention C equal to context.getBean customers class that you had mentioned in the application class, the compiler will check whether there is a customer bean available in the container or not. If the bean is available, then the Spring framework is basically injecting the customer object in your application. So basically this object is created by the Spring framework, which can be used further in the application. So now let's just execute the project again. So for that, I'll close this particular project and let's say I choose the relaunch option and then I click on OK. Right. So let's see what happens once the project gets executed. Now, once the project gets executed, you see an output of, customer's object returned successfully. Right. So that is basically how we can implement the dependency injection, guys. We wanted an object to be created and we did not want to do it manually. Instead, we chose to do it at runtime, right? So basically it automatically happened at the runtime. So to do that, what I'd done is that, I'd basically created a customer's class with the parameters like customer ID, customer name, and course name. And for that, I'd put in the getter setter methods. And finally, I went back to the application class where I'd basically changed the configurable application context run line to this particular line that you can see on my screen. And then I set customer C equal to context.getBean customers.class. So basically over here, we're trying to tell the Spring container that, we need a Spring object of the customers class. So that is the reason we've mentioned customers over here. And then to just check the output, I'd created a method with the name display. And then if the project runs fine, we had seen that, we get an output of customers object returned successfully, right? So for that, I just call this particular method in this particular class. Apart from that, I just chose the server port to be 8082. So that's how basically, guys, you can implement the dependency injection, right? So I hope that you've understood how dependency injection works in Spring Boot. Now let's extend this example and further see how a class dependent on the other class uses the functionalities of that particular class in Spring Boot. So that was about dependency injection, right? So our main concept of dependency injection was how a specific class which is dependent on the other class uses its functionality, right? So let's see how that happens. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to extend the same project. So for that, I'll just stop the execution over here. And then what I'll do is I'll create a new class. So to do that, again, I'll right click on the package over here, go to new, and then I'll say class. And let's say, I'd mentioned the class name to be technologies, right? So we just working with the different technologies and the courses, right? So I'll just mention technologies and then I'll click on finish, right? So similarly as that of the customer class, I'll add few parameters in the technology class like the tech ID and the tech name, right? So I'll mention private int and then I'll mention tech ID, right? And then again, I'll mention private string and then I'll mention tech name. So now once this is done, I'll again generate the getter setter method. So I'll choose these particular parameters, right click over here, go to source, and then I'll choose generate getter and setters, right? So I'll select over here and click on generate. Now after that, you'll see that, automatically the getter and the setter methods have got generated. Now once that is done, we'll again basically use a method to display the output, whether it is successful or not. So I'll again just mention public void, let's say tech, and in brackets I'll mention system.out.println, and in brackets I'll mention, let's say, completed. And then I'll just close this particular section. And now what I'll do is I'll basically call this tech method in the customers class, right? So I'll go back to the customers class, and then what I'll do is I'll basically add a new parameter over here, that is private, the class name, that is basically technologies, and then I'll mention, let's say, tech detail, right? So that is basically the parameter that I'm using over here. And then I'll select this particular parameter, right click, go to source, and I'll generate the getter and the setter methods for it, right? So I'll just select this and click on generate, right? So let me just put it before this so that it's clear. Now after that, what we'll do is we'll basically use the tech method to mention the tech details.tech under the display method of the customers class, right? So to make sure that the tech detail option is instantiated, you have to go back to the technologies class, and over here you basically have to mention the @component annotation, right? So I'll just mention @component, right? And then I'll import this particular section, and in the display class of customers, what I'll basically do is I'll call in the tech method. So for that, I'll mention tech detail that I had just chosen as a parameter in the customers class, and then I'll mention the tech method. So that looks fine. Now let's just execute this particular project again. So I'll just relaunch this particular project. All right, so we see an error that Java lang null pointer exception, but our dependency application has started, but yet it says that customers object returned successfully, but does not shows the completed method, right? So that is basically the completed output that we wanted to see. Doesn't show that. That's because the customer class is dependent on the technologies class, but yet it does not know the existence of the technologies class, right? So if you say you have class A and class B, then class A is dependent on class B, but yet it does not know the existence of class B. So to make sure that the class A gets to know about the existence of class B, you have to use the auto-void annotation. So basically the auto-void annotation is used to enable a class to recognize the other class and make sure the dependencies are satisfied. So let's see how to make sure that the customer class recognizes the technologies class. So to do that, you basically have to insert the @auto-void annotation in the customers class itself, right? So what I'll do is I'll just drag this down, and then what I'll do is before the technologies details section, I'll just add @autowired, right? And then I'll just import the required libraries for that. And then what I'll do is I'll again execute the project. So let's just relaunch the project again. And let's say I just drag this up so that we can see the output. So once the project gets executed, we clearly see an output of customers object returned successfully and also completed, which means our dependency has been satisfied by both the classes, and both the classes know the existence of each other, and the customers class is using the object of the technologies class. So guys, that's how you can use dependency injection in Spring Boot. I hope that you've understood how to get started with it. So guys, that was all about dependency injection.